It was 4:31 PM on the west coast when it happened. In LA, the freeways were absolutely jammed with cars, each one filled with anger and hate and boredom. Agent Cooper was inside one of those cars when the world ended. He'd always assumed the end would be some grand event. After all, in his time at the SCP Foundation, he'd seen so many dangerous anomalies that it seemed like it would be impossible to avoid. Some of them could end all life on Earth in an instant. So Agent Cooper was very surprised when the gong sounded and the end of the world started slowly. The ground shook beneath him. At first, he wasn't worried. California has earthquakes all the time. But what had started as a low rumble gained in power and loudness. Soon it was impossible to hear the honking horns around him, and in the distance, he saw the horns of one of the entities he feared the most rising from the earth. Above him, the stars, which had only just started sparkling as the sun went down, began to blink out one by one. They would not come back. The face of the entity came into view. As tall as a skyscraper, it loomed over him. He felt his sense of self beginning to slip away. The Scarlet King had broken his chains. Nothing could stop it now. Chaos reigned on Earth. Agent Cooper, veteran employee of the SCP Foundation, reached into his glove compartment, grabbed the Beretta he always kept there, and quickly tendered his resignation. SCP fans, call Aragorn and light the beacons because it's happening. I might just have the greatest piece of SCP media ever to show you, an actual SCP comic book series, Parabooks, the absolute legends that made these bad boys, the SCP encyclopedias a few years back. Well, they've now made SCP comics. Look at this, 5 SCP comics on the Old Man, the Coral SCP, the Plague Doctor, the Red Sea Object, and the Dimension Hopper, all in a beautiful magnetic box with bonus editions that contain enamel pins and sound chips. Sign up on their Kickstarter and they'll even throw in extra stretch goal rewards, and there are some insane looking deluxe editions with red foil finishes and special acrylic stands. I'm losing my mind, I'm losing my voice. You've got to get this. Follow the link in the description to get this beautiful set now and support Parabooks so that they can continue creating SCP projects for us, just like these new comics. And of course the SCP encyclopedias. On the far side of the Sierra Nevada mountain range, another being of great power was stirring. SCP-2845, the Deer, had been in containment for years now, and the rift caused by its public display of power was only just now being repaired. The entity had landed in the Pacific Ocean in late 2011 and rampaged across central California for a month prior to containment. It cut a path across the mountains, leaving behind a scar that still glowed with power. The GOC and the SCP Foundation had to work together to deal with this entity, and they'd succeeded admirably, all things considered. Over the last decade, the two organizations had become closer, but the Foundation still retained primary custody and control of SCP-2845's containment. The United States government and the GOC assisted where they could, but the Broken Veil had kept everyone quite busy. In the intervening years, government did what government does. They set up committees and oversight boards. The newly elected officials promised to rein in the threat from the stars. With the Broken Veil, the SCP Foundation had to pivot hard, and the Ethics Committee, the long-suffering black sheep of the SCP Foundation's hierarchy, found itself with even more power than it had before. Dr. Cimmerian, newly approved head of the SCP-2845 project and Site-06 director, was one of the newest appointments that attempted to appease the politicians. They wouldn't ever be appeased, of course, but they were very flattered that the Foundation tried. Tonight though, here on the eastern slopes of the Sierra Nevada, none of this mattered. The threat from the stars had so enraptured the talking heads and governments of the world that something worse and closer to home had festered. Tonight, that wound had broken open, and from it emerged the direst threat the world had ever faced. GOC agent Lucille Merryweather stood at attention as Dr. Cimmerian opened the door to his new office and invited her in. She looked around awkwardly at the bare-bones setting. The desk at the centre of the room was impressive, but the bookshelves were empty, and the chair she was offered to sit in was a simple painted grey wooden one.
Apologies, I was just starting to move in,
Cimmerian said with a grin.
Of course.
You should take a seat. This is gonna be a long meeting.
Yes, sir.
Cimmerian shook his head.
Stop that. I don't need a soldier here. If we're gonna survive the night, we need to be a team.
Agent Merryweather relaxed slightly.
Sorry, sir. Habit.
Yeah, so, Scarlet King's out.
Fully out, yes, sir. Rose out of the ground in LA. We're looking at a few thousand dead from the emergence, and the city itself is going mad.
Cimmerian leaned back in his own chair.
4 million or so people falling under the influence of a god of chaos and madness isn't exactly a good starting point.
No, sir.
And I understand the GOC is already engaging the entity in combat?
Yes, sir, the GOC has been authorized to begin heavy artillery bombardment and close air missions against the target. The US government is still putting people and material on the ground, but they should be up and running within the hour.
What are the limits?
It's US soil, so they get final say on the rules of engagement, but given the reports I'm getting, I think that by dawn tomorrow, LA is going to be a radioactive crater.
Now that sounds like the GOC I know.
Yes, sir.
Look, we need to begin planning for the ultimate contingency. We have no evidence that a nuclear attack will be sufficient to even slow this thing down.
Of course.
Agent Merryweather leaned forward.
But it'll be weakened a bit by having 4 million less followers.
And that I cannot argue with, much as I'd like to. But the Scarlet King is going to go looking for new followers, new power, and the nearest font of power is the scar just west of here.
Yes, sir, that's why I'm here. The Foundation Overseers Council, the GOC Security Council, and the House Anomalous Management Committee have all put forth the same plan to fight this thing. President Hanks has signed off on it as well.
Of course.
We expect with the loss of LA, the entity will turn north and emerge in San Francisco. It will then likely turn east to follow the scar across the Sierra Nevadas and find this compound.
Cimmerian slumped in his seat.
We're gonna turn the deer loose, aren't we?
Those are my orders, sir. Yes.
A single button press in some complex deep within the Rocky Mountains was the final trigger for the next phase of the plan to save the world. A rocket ship ignited its engines and a low vibration echoed across the silo. The missile took flight, bright and silver, and flew into low Earth orbit before repositioning itself and diving headfirst towards Los Angeles. This bomb was codenamed the State Killer and had a yield of approximately 35 megatons. The code name was a bit dishonest. This bomb wasn't capable of destroying any but the smallest of states, but it was capable of killing every single person inside the LA city limits. And it almost did. There are many ways to survive a nuclear explosion. You can take cover or shelter and hope you're far enough away from the epicenter that it doesn't kill you anyway. But the most effective way is to not be where it goes off. The Scarlet King was a being of powerful energies, but there was no question that when the State Killer came calling, it wanted to be where the bomb wasn't. The 4 million or so possessed citizens in the surrounding city were not so lucky, nor were some of the deployed soldiers or agents of various paranormal organizations. The bomb exploded far above the surface of the city and expanded in a beautiful white-hot ball of energy. It killed everyone and everything except for its target. In the city of San Francisco, the earth rumbled and the hills of the city erupted. The Scarlet King emerged again. This time, it felt the draw of mystical energy to the east. Curious, it began to move slowly in that direction. Millions of enslaved citizens followed. At Site 6, everything was in balance. And then it wasn't. The locks on reality that ritual had created were no longer engaged. The power that kept SCP-2845 here was no longer being exercised. Chaos reigned. Chaos in the west. The first thing the deer did was break its bonds. Site 6 was long since abandoned, so there were no casualties. But the next thing it did was feel the tug of chaos needing to be sorted. It raised its antlers to the sky. The stars had gone away. This wouldn't do. One by one, they began to return. The massive creature turned to the west, across the scar it had carved in the mountains, and galloped towards San Francisco. The Joint Task Force began to set up barricades as they waited. People with guns and majors aplenty peppered this small background. Hundreds of tanks joined the ranks. The two gods were travelling towards each other at a constant speed. Calculations said that this is where they'd meet, so the hopes of the world would be settled here. The only way the world had a future is if the deal won, and then was recontained. There were a lot of ifs that needed to become definitive for the world to be saved, but the madness of the Scarlet King was already spreading throughout California. Only people properly shrouded from the influence of chaos were able to withstand the mental intrusion, and there was no guarantee that would last forever. The sun didn't rise. Or, I suppose it did, but instead of a sun there was just a hole in the sky, a blacker void than the surrounding space. The stars above blinked in and out of existence, sometimes exploding into brilliant light, only to be swallowed up again by the inky blackness of a night darker than any sin ever committed. If the supernovas were any indication, the universe was unraveling. Perhaps those mad followers of the Scarlet King were the only people capable of understanding the world as it was becoming. Perhaps not. As the Scarlet King moved across the ground, the sky was torn asunder. As the deer moved similarly, a frozen silver metal corruption coated the land. The two entities were moving so quickly that when they locked horns, it seemed instantaneous. On impact, a resounding thud echoed across the Earth, the galaxy, the universe. The Joint Task Force was overcome with the force of the impact. It was clear from the moment that they encountered each other that both the Scarlet King and the deer existed far beyond the spatial dimensions that humans were capable of seeing. A moment passed. They tore into each other. Terrible energies bled out of the Scarlet King where the deer's horns wounded it, corrupting the ground below it. Reality was punctured and holes to an infinite darkness materialized. A shard of serrated red matter scraped the back of the deer, and a bright silver light burned away the heavens. A new, glistening universe shined through the schism. It was all too much. Order became untenable, and the delicate balance that held the universe together evaporated. The sky inverted inwards. The stars disappeared into themselves, and time became a thing of fiction. The only thing left in the universe were these two entities. Their eternal struggles spilled into other nearby universes. The multiverse itself dissolved into nothing. 1 trillion different Earths died before finally this dimension ceased to exist, and the two beings finally fell apart. At the end, the Scarlet King's corruption poured out of its belly. At the beginning, the silver light of the deer leaked from its hindquarters. If anyone had been left to see it, it would have been astonishing. They both fell, corrupted and shining, bleeding out their life energies into an endless nothing. But this was of no consequence to the king. None at all. He had entered but one dimension on this occasion. He extended beyond comprehension into realms of pure thought and consciousness, into dimensions that had no description even. This creature was little more than a flea bite in truth. This thing may be a god, but he was a king. The king. He was there at the beginning, and he would be there at the end. Alas, their brief meeting had undone this universe, and the king's subjects had been erased. This would not do. The king reached from the next dimension and began swirling the spilling life energies of his and this creature's corpses. Soon the elements began to balance, opposites began to bond, an incomprehensible infinite energy began to burn as the elements bonded into smaller and smaller space. And then out of nothing, suddenly, everything began again. It took nearly 14 billion years to get back to that poorly decorated office with Dr. Cimmerian and Agent Merryweather. It took another few minutes to get back to the plan to release the deer and hope it could stop the Scarlet King. Cimmerian slumped in his seat.
We're gonna turn the deer loose, aren't we?
Those are my orders, sir. Yes.
Cimmerian wrinkled his nose.
No. Hell no. What are you guys smoking?
They both sat there for a few moments in silence.
Do you have a better idea, sir?
Not yet. I'm sure I could think of one.
And the king smiled. Check out this video for another great story, and please leave a like if you made it this far, it really helps the channel. Big thanks to Cimmerian for writing this tale, big up the patrons, and special thanks to Andre Bachert, Ryan Brenner, Silly Goose, Infinitune, and Viger.